In the shadowed halls of Ravencliff Castle, a chilling scream pierces the night. Lord Edgar Ravencliff lies dead, a jewelled dagger in his heart, in a locked library where no one could have entered. Or could they? Hercule Poirot, the master of mysteries, steps into a web of family secrets, hidden passages, and a cursed raven's shadow. As poison strikes and bullets fly, every guest, haughty Lady Margaret, reckless Charles, ambitious Clara, secretive Dr. Thorne, and glamorous Evelyn, hides a motive. In just 30 seconds, dive into a world where trust is a lie, and only Poirot's little grey cells can unmask a killer before the shadow falls again. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Ravencliff. The train rattled through the desolate Yorkshire moors, its rhythmic clatter a stark contrast to the bleak, windswept landscape beyond the window. Hercule Poirot, seated in the first-class carriage, adjusted his immaculate Homburg hat and smoothed his meticulously groomed moustache. His small, fastidious hands rested on a letter, its creased edges betraying how often he had reread it during the journey. The missive, penned in the elegant but unsteady hand of Lord Edgar Ravencliff, had been both intriguing and cryptic. It spoke of a matter requiring discretion and a shadow upon my house, urging Poirot to visit Ravencliff Castle with utmost haste. Such vagueness, Poirot mused, often concealed a matter of grave import, and his little grey cells hummed with anticipation. The station at Ravencliff was little more than a windswept platform, the air sharp with the scent of heather and impending rain. Poirot stepped down, his patent leather shoes gleaming incongruously against the rough stone. A man awaited him, broad-shouldered and silent, his face weathered like the moors themselves. "Monsieur Poirot? I'm Harris, Lord Ravencliff's driver," he said, his voice gruff but respectful. Without further words, he led Poirot to a sleek black Rolls-Royce, its engine purring softly as it began the ascent toward the castle. The road wound through gnarled trees and jagged outcrops, the mist thickening with each turn. Ravencliff Castle emerged like a spectre, its grey stone walls rising starkly against the bruised sky. Turrets loomed, their silhouettes jagged as if clawing at the heavens. Poirot's keen eyes noted the ivy strangling the battlements, a testament to the castle's age and neglect. "A place of secrets," he murmured to himself, his gloved fingers tightening around his silver-topped cane. At the castle's entrance, a heavy oak door groaned open, revealing Lord Edgar Ravencliff himself. He was a tall, gaunt man, his face etched with lines that spoke of sleepless nights. His eyes, sharp and grey as the stone around them, flickered with unease. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, extending a hand that trembled slightly. "Your presence honours us. I trust your journey was tolerable." His voice carried the clipped precision of the English aristocracy, yet an undercurrent of anxiety betrayed him. "Most tolerable, merci," Poirot replied, his accent as polished as his demeanour. "But I confess, your letter has stirred my curiosity. You speak of a shadow, yet offer no detail. Perhaps you will enlighten Hercule Poirot." Lord Edgar's lips tightened. "In time, monsieur. For now, join us for dinner. You'll meet the household, and perhaps—" He trailed off, his gaze darting toward the shadowed hall. "Perhaps you'll see for yourself." The dining room was a cavernous space, its walls adorned with faded tapestries depicting hunts and battles long forgotten. A chandelier cast flickering light across a mahogany table where the Ravencliff family and their guests were assembling. Lady Margaret Ravencliff, Edgar's wife, sat at one end, her posture rigid, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon. Her eyes, a pale blue, assessed Poirot with cool detachment, offering only a curt nod as he was introduced. Charles Ravencliff, their son, lounged with the careless grace of youth, his handsome features marred by a petulant mouth. He flashed a charming smile, but Poirot noted the restless tapping of his fingers. Clara Ravencliffe, Edgar's niece, was a striking contrast. A young woman with auburn hair and a spark of defiance in her green eyes. She greeted Poirot warmly, her curiosity evident. "I've read of your cases, Monsieur Poirot," she said. "You must find our little gathering rather dull." Poirot smiled enigmatically. "On the contrary, mademoiselle, I find no gathering dull where human nature is at play." Dr. Alistair Thorne, a lean man with a scholar's stoop, adjusted his spectacles nervously as he shook Poirot's hand. "A pleasure, sir," he murmured, though his eyes avoided Poirot's scrutiny. Finally, there was Evelyn Marsh, an actress whose name adorned London's marquees. Her raven black hair and crimson lips drew every eye, but it was her sharp, knowing glance that intrigued Poirot most. "Monsieur Poirot," she purred, "I hope you're not here to uncover all our secrets." Dinner proceeded with the clink of crystal and the murmur of strained conversation. Lord Edgar spoke little, his attention drifting to the windows, where the wind howled like a restless spirit. Lady Margaret maintained an icy silence, while Charles regaled the table with tales of his latest exploits in London, each story tinged with reckless bravado. Clara challenged him playfully, her wit cutting through his bluster. Dr. Thorne ate sparingly, his thoughts elsewhere, while Evelyn's laughter rang like a bell, though Poirot sensed it was a performance. As the clock in the hall chimed midnight, the atmosphere shifted. A piercing scream tore through the castle, freezing every guest in their seat. Harris burst into the room, his face ashen. "My lord!" he gasped, clutching the doorframe. "It's Lord Edgar! He's dead! Stabbed in the library!" The room erupted in chaos. Lady Margaret rose, her hand at her throat, while Charles swore under his breath. Clara's eyes widened, and Dr. Thorne's fork clattered to his plate. Evelyn alone remained composed, though her fingers tightened around her wine-glass. Poirot, his expression calm but alert, stood. "Messieurs, mesdames, remain here," he commanded softly. "Hercule Poirot will investigate." As he followed Harris to the library, Poirot's mind raced. The shadow Lord Edgar had feared had fallen, and the game, as he knew it must, had begun. Chapter 2. The Scene of the Crime. The heavy silence of Ravencliffe Castle was shattered by the echo of Harris's words, each syllable hanging in the air like a tolling bell. Hercule Poirot, his small frame taut with purpose, followed the driver through the dimly lit corridors, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the stone floor. The other guests remained in the dining room, their faces a tableau of shock and suspicion, as instructed by Poirot's calm but authoritative command. Inspector Grayson, a stout man with a weathered face and a moustache that rivaled Poirot's in girth, if not in elegance, had been summoned from the nearby village of Ravencliffe. He joined them at the library door, his breath heavy from the haste of his arrival. The library was a cavernous chamber, its walls lined with towering bookshelves that seemed to lean inward, as if guarding secrets of their own. A fire smouldered in the grate, casting flickering shadows across the room. At the centre, slumped over a massive oak desk, lay Lord Edgar Ravencliffe, his lifeless form illuminated by the soft glow of a green-shaded lamp. A jewelled dagger, its hilt encrusted with emeralds, protruded from his chest, the blade buried deep. Blood had pooled beneath him, staining the blotter and dripping onto the Persian rug below. Poirot's keen eyes took in every detail. The toppled inkwell, its contents spreading like a dark omen across scattered papers. A single sheet clutched in Edgar's rigid hand, and the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the night. Inspector Grayson, mopping his brow with a handkerchief, surveyed the scene with a mix of awe and frustration. "A locked room, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice gruff. The door was bolted from the inside, the windows latched. No sign of forced entry. How the devil did the killer get in and out? Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The impossible, mon ami, is merely a challenge to the little grey cells. A locked room is not a fortress, it is a puzzle, and Hercule Poirot does not shy away from puzzles. He stepped forward, his movements precise, almost delicate, as he examined the body. Lord Edgar's face was frozen in a grimace, his eyes wide with what might have been surprise or fear. The dagger, Poirot noted, was not a common weapon, but a ceremonial piece, its craftsmanship suggesting both value and history. "This dagger," he murmured. "It is not chosen by chance. It speaks of intention, perhaps of symbolism." Grayson, peering over Poirot's shoulder, grunted. "Symbolism? Looks like a murder to me, plain and simple. Someone had a grudge, and they settled it. Plain, Inspector." "Non, non. Murder is never plain. It is a tapestry woven with threads of motive, opportunity, and method. We must unravel each." Poirot's gloved fingers gently pried the crumpled paper from Edgar's grasp. It was a single sheet, written in a hurried scrawl. "The raven's shadow will fall at midnight." The words sent a ripple through Poirot's mind. Was this a warning, a prophecy, or a deliberate misdirection? He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his pocket, his expression unreadable. Turning to the room itself, Poirot examined the door. The bolt was indeed engaged, a heavy iron mechanism that could only be operated from within. The windows, tall and narrow, were secured with sturdy latches, their panes intact. The walls, lined with books, offered no obvious signs of tampering. Yet Poirot's instincts, honed by years of unravelling the improbable, whispered that the answer lay in the room's very structure. He paced slowly, his eyes scanning every surface, every shadow. Harris, lingering nervously by the door, cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, if I may, earlier this evening before dinner, I heard something odd near the library. A scraping sound like stone on stone. I thought it was the wind, but now—" His voice trailed off, his hands twisting together. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Stone on stone, you say? Most interesting, Monsieur Harris. Where precisely did you hear this sound?" "Near the east wall, sir, by the fireplace. I was passing by on my way to the kitchens." Poirot nodded, filing the detail away. "Merci. You have been most helpful." He dismissed Harris with a wave, then turned to Grayson. "We must consider all possibilities, Inspector. The locked room suggests cunning, but the method is not yet clear. Let us examine the alibis of those present." Grayson produced a notebook, flipping it open with a practiced motion. "Right. Everyone was in the dining room when the scream was heard. Harris confirmed it. Lady Margaret, Charles, Clara, Dr. Thorne, and Miss Marsh. The scream came at midnight, and Harris found the body moments later. No one could have slipped away, stabbed him, and returned without being noticed, could they?" Poirot tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. Could they not? The human mind is adept at distraction, and the human eye is easily deceived. We must question each person, but first, let us explore the room further. He approached the fireplace, its embers glowing faintly. The east wall, as Harris had indicated, was a solid expanse of stone, partially obscured by a towering bookcase. Poirot ran his fingers along the edge of the shelves, feeling for irregularities. His touch was light, almost reverent, as if coaxing the castle itself to reveal its secrets. A faint draught brushed his fingertips, and he paused, his eyes narrowing. With a gentle push, a section of the bookcase clicked and swung inward, revealing a narrow passage shrouded in darkness. "Mon Dieu!" Poirot exclaimed softly. "The locked room is no longer locked. Behold, Inspector, the hidden way." Grayson peered into the passage, his face a mask of astonishment. A secret passage, in a place like this. It's like something out of a penny dreadful. "Yet it is real," Poirot replied, stepping into the passage. The air was musty, heavy with the scent of damp stone and time. Cobwebs clung to the walls, and the floor was uneven, suggesting long disuse. The passage curved downward, leading to a small chamber lit only by the faint glow of Poirot's pocket torch. The chamber was bare save for a stack of dusty portraits, their subjects staring out with faded, accusing eyes. At the centre stood a locked chest, its iron bands rusted but intact. Poirot knelt beside the chest, producing a small tool from his pocket. A master of many skills, he was not above the occasional lock-picking when necessity demanded. The lock yielded with a reluctant groan, revealing a cache of yellowed documents. Among them was a series of letters detailing a bitter dispute between Lord Edgar and a former business partner, Sir Reginald Blackwood. The correspondence spoke of a betrayal, a fortune in shares stolen by Edgar, leaving Blackwood ruined. The final letter, dated a decade earlier, was a vow of vengeance. "He has taken everything," Blackwood had written, "and I shall see him pay." Poirot's mind raced. Had Blackwood returned, his grudge festering into murder? Or had someone else discovered these letters and used them to craft a motive? He tucked the documents into his coat, his expression grave. "This chest, Inspector, is a window into the past, but it is the present that concerns us now." Returning to the library, Poirot resumed his examination. The desk yielded little more. A ledger of household expenses, a fountain pen, and a half-finished letter addressed to a solicitor, hinting at changes to Edgar's will. The mention of Clara's name caught Poirot's eye, but the letter was incomplete, its intent unclear. He turned his attention to the dagger, its emeralds glinting malevolently in the lamplight. "This weapon," he said to Grayson, "is a family heirloom, oui? It was kept in a display case in the hall, accessible to all. Why choose such a blade? So distinctive, so traceable?" Grayson shrugged. "To make a point, maybe, or to frame someone." "Précisément," Poirot agreed. "But who, and why now?" He stepped back, his hands clasped behind him, his eyes sweeping the room once more. "The scene is set, the players known. Now, we must uncover their secrets." Grayson, less enamoured of Poirot's theatrical flair, began organising his men to guard the library and question the staff. Poirot, however, requested a moment alone with the body. He stood over Lord Edgar, his expression softening. "You knew your enemy, did you not?" he murmured. "You wrote of the raven's shadow, but you did not flee. Why?" The question lingered unanswered as Poirot rejoined Grayson. Together they returned to the dining room, where the household awaited, their faces pale and strained. Lady Margaret sat erect, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on some distant point. Charles paced, his earlier charm replaced by nervous energy. Clara clutched a handkerchief, her knuckles white. Dr. Thorne fidgeted with his cufflinks, his brow furrowed. Evelyn Marsh, alone among them, seemed almost serene, though her fingers toyed with a pearl necklace, betraying a hint of unease. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Margaret said, her voice cutting through the silence, "have you found the monster who did this?" Poirot raised a hand, his gesture both calming and commanding. "A monster, madame? Perhaps. But first I must ask each of you to account for your movements this evening. The truth, it is like a light. It reveals all, even that which we wish to hide." The questioning began, each response layered with hesitation. Lady Margaret claimed to have been in her sitting room before dinner, writing letters, though she could not recall to whom. Charles admitted to wandering the grounds, clearing his head after an argument with his father. Clara had been in the conservatory, sketching, though no one could vouch for her. Dr. Thorne said he was in his room, reviewing medical journals, a claim as vague as it was unverifiable. Evelyn, with a coy smile, insisted she had been practicing lines in her guest suite, though the dead telephone line cast doubt on her claim of a call to her agent. Poirot listened, his eyes darting from face to face, cataloguing every inflection, every glance. "You are all most forthcoming," he said at last, his tone deceptively mild. Yet someone in this house knows more than they say. The raven's shadow has fallen, but Hercule Poirot will lift it. As the household dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the vast hall, Poirot turned to Grayson. "We have a murderer among us, Inspector, and they are clever. But they have made one mistake. They have underestimated the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, as if the castle itself were urging him to uncover its secrets. Poirot straightened his tie, his resolve unshaken. The game was afoot, and he would play it to its end. Chapter 3. The Family Secrets. The morning after Lord Edgar Ravencliff's murder dawned grey and oppressive, the Yorkshire moors shrouded in a mist that clung to Ravencliff Castle like a mourner's veil. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, stood in the castle's rose garden, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. The air was damp, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and fading blooms. He had risen before the household, preferring the solitude of dawn to organise his thoughts. The murder, with its locked room and jewelled dagger, was a puzzle of exquisite complexity, and Poirot's little grey cells were already weaving the threads of evidence into a pattern. Inside, the castle stirred reluctantly. The servants moved with hushed steps, their faces pale with shock and whispered gossip. Inspector Grayson had stationed 2 constables at the library door, where Lord Edgar's body had been discreetly removed to a makeshift morgue in the cellar. Poirot, however, had no interest in lingering over the corpse. His focus was on the living, for it was among them that the murderer hid. He began his inquiries in the morning room, a bright space with tall windows that did little to dispel the gloom. Lady Margaret Ravencliff was the first to face him, seated in a high-backed chair, her hands folded with the precision of a woman accustomed to control. Her morning attire, a severe black gown, contrasted sharply with her pale complexion, but her eyes held no trace of tears. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice as crisp as the frost outside, "I trust you have made progress. This tragedy must not tarnish the Ravencliff name." Poirot inclined his head, his expression courteous but probing. "Madame, the truth does not tarnish. It reveals. Tell me, if you please, of your husband's state of mind in recent days. He wrote of a shadow. Did he share its nature with you?" Lady Margaret's lips tightened, a flicker of irritation crossing her face. Edgar was superstitious, always prattling about some family curse tied to a raven. He believed it foretold death, a notion I found absurd. Lately, he was agitated, convinced someone in this house wished him harm. He would not say who, only that he had enemies. She paused, her fingers smoothing an imaginary crease in her gown. I dismissed it as paranoia. Perhaps I was wrong. Poirot noted the absence of warmth in her words. "And your movements last evening, before dinner? You mentioned writing letters, oui?" "Yes," she replied, her gaze steady. "In my sitting room. I was alone, as I often am. Edgar preferred his library, and I value my solitude." "Most understandable," Poirot said, though his eyes lingered on her hands, unmarred by ink stains despite her claim. "And these enemies of your husband, did he name any? A business rival, perhaps, or someone closer?" Her eyes narrowed. "If you mean to imply something, monsieur, speak plainly. I know nothing of his business dealings, and as for family, Charles was a disappointment, but hardly a murderer." Her tone was sharp, but Poirot detected a tremor beneath it. "Merci, madame. You have been most illuminating." Poirot dismissed her with a bow, his mind cataloguing the discrepancy in her story. No ink, no letters, perhaps a lie, or perhaps a truth carefully curated. Next came Charles Ravencliff, slouching into the room with the air of a man who found life a tiresome burden. His tailored suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night or something stronger. "Look here, Poirot," he began, without preamble. "I didn't kill the old man. We had our rows, sure, but I'm not the type to stick a dagger in anyone. Poirot raised an eyebrow, his voice gentle but firm. Monsieur Charles, it is not for you to decide your type, but for Hercule Poirot to discern it. Your father, he was to cut you off, non? Your debts, they are considerable, I understand. Charles flushed, his hands balling into fists. Who told you that? Clara, I'll bet, always poking her nose in. Yes, I owe money. Cards, horses, the usual. Father was furious, said I'd get nothing if I didn't shape up. But I was out on the grounds last night, nowhere near the library. Ask anyone. Yet no one saw you, monsieur, Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. A man in debt, with a father who threatens his inheritance. This is a motive, is it not? Charles leapt to his feet, his face darkening. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. I'm no saint, but I'm no killer either. He stormed out, leaving a trail of indignation. Clara Ravencliffe entered next, her auburn hair catching the light as she sat opposite Poirot. Unlike her aunt and cousin, she carried an air of openness, though her green eyes were shadowed with worry. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice steady. I want to help. Uncle Edgar was kind to me, more than to Charles. I can't believe he's gone. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze softening. Mademoiselle Clara, you are most refreshing. Tell me, what was your uncle's disposition toward you? There are whispers of a new will favouring you. Is this so? Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of her scarf. He told me last week he was changing his will. He said I had potential, that I could carry on the Ravencliffe legacy. Charles was furious when he heard, called me a schemer. But I never asked for it, Monsieur Poirot. I only wanted Uncle Edgar's respect. And where were you before dinner? Poirot asked, his eyes never leaving her face. In the conservatory, sketching. It's where I go to think. I was alone, but I saw Charles pass by outside, heading toward the stables. He looked angry. Poirot nodded, filing away the detail. And this curse your uncle feared, the raven's shadow. Did he speak of it to you? Clara shivered. Once, when I was a child, he told me the story. A raven, he said, appeared before every Ravencliffe death, a warning of doom. I thought it was just a tale, but he was obsessed with it lately. He kept saying the shadow was near. Most interesting, Poirot murmured. Merci, mademoiselle. You have given me much to consider. Dr. Alistair Thorne was next, his scholarly demeanour strained by nervous energy. He adjusted his spectacles, repeatedly, his hands betraying his unease. Monsieur Poirot, he began, I'm a man of science, not intrigue. I can't imagine why you'd want to speak with me. Poirot smiled, his eyes sharp. Science, Monsieur le Docteur, can be a tool of intrigue. You were studying a rare poison, I understand. Tell me about it. Thorne blinked, startled. How did you... Yes, I've been researching a South American toxin, curare, for a paper. It's purely academic, I assure you. I was in my room last night reading. I heard nothing until the scream. Curare, Poirot repeated, his voice thoughtful. A poison that paralyzes, oui? Most curious. And your friendship with Lord Edgar? How deep did it run? Thorne shifted uncomfortably. We were close once. He consulted me on his health, though he was robust for his age. Lately he was distant, worried, I'd say. Poirot dismissed him, his mind turning over the doctor's evasiveness. A poison, a nervous manner. Thorne bore watching. Finally, Evelyn Marsh swept into the room, her elegance undimmed by the tragedy. She sank into a chair with the grace of a stage star, her crimson lips curving into a faint smile. Monsieur Poirot, you're quite the sensation. Tell me, am I a suspect in your little drama? Poirot's eyes twinkled, but his tone was serious. Mademoiselle Marsh, all are suspects until the truth is known. You were close to Lord Edgar, non? Perhaps more than a friend. Her laughter was like crystal, but it held an edge. You're fishing, monsieur. Yes, Edgar and I had a dalliance years ago when I was young and he was charming. It ended amicably. I was here at his invitation, nothing more. Last night I was in my room rehearsing lines. The telephone was dead, so I couldn't call my agent as planned. Poirot noted the detail, his mind circling back to the dead telephone line. And this curse, mademoiselle, did Lord Edgar speak of it to you? Evelyn's smile faded. He mentioned it once, in a melancholy mood. Said the raven's shadow was his fate. I told him to stop being morbid, but he wouldn't listen. As she left, Poirot sat back, his fingers steepled. Each interview had revealed a piece of the puzzle. Lady Margaret's coldness, Charles's debts, Clara's ambition, Thorne's secrecy, Evelyn's past. The hidden passage in the Blackwood letters added further complexity, suggesting motives rooted in both family and history. But the note in Edgar's hand, "The raven's shadow will fall at midnight," gnawed at him. It was too precise, too theatrical, as if designed to mislead. He rose, his decision made. "Inspector Grayson," he called, finding the man in the hall. "We must search the castle further. The passage is a clue, but there are others. The murderer has left footprints, even if they are not of mud." Grayson nodded, though his expression was sceptical. "You think there's more to find? This place is a maze." "Précisément," Poirot said, his eyes alight. "And in a maze, one must follow every turn to find the centre." As they moved toward the east wing, Poirot's mind churned. The raven's shadow was no curse. It was a human hand, guided by greed, betrayal, or vengeance. And Hercule Poirot would not rest until he held it in the light. Chapter 4. The Hidden Passage. The mist that clung to Ravencliff Castle seemed to thicken as the day wore on, wrapping the ancient stones in a shroud of secrecy. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the oppressive atmosphere, stood in the library where Lord Edgar Ravencliff had met his end. The room, though cleared of the body, still bore the weight of death. The faint scent of blood lingered, mingling with the musty odour of old books. Inspector Grayson, his notebook in hand, hovered nearby, his broad face etched with the frustration of a man grappling with an enigma. Poirot, however, was in his element, his small frame radiating a quiet intensity as he prepared to unravel the next thread of the mystery. The discovery of the secret passage behind the bookcase had shifted the investigation, transforming the locked room into a stage with a hidden exit. Poirot's mind, ever orderly, turned to Harris's account of the scraping sound, like stone on stone, heard near the library's east wall. "This passage," Poirot said, his voice low but resonant. "It is the key, Inspector, not only to the method of the crime but perhaps to its motive. We must explore it fully." Grayson, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow despite the chill, nodded. "Right then, let's see where it leads. But I'll wager it's just some old smuggler's bolt hole. Nothing to do with this business." Poirot's moustache twitched with amusement. "A wager, mon ami? I accept, but I warn you, Hercule Poirot does not wager lightly." He stepped into the passage, his pocket torch casting a narrow beam into the darkness. The air was damp and heavy, the walls rough-hewn stone that seemed to pulse with the castle's ancient history. Grayson followed, his heavy footsteps echoing in the confined space. The passage descended in a gentle spiral, its walls narrowing until Poirot's shoulders nearly brushed the stone. Cobwebs clung to his hat, and he brushed them away with a fastidious flick of his hand. The torchlight revealed faint markings, scratches perhaps, or remnants of long-forgotten carvings. At last, the passage opened into a small, circular chamber, its ceiling low and vaulted. The air here was stale, as if undisturbed for decades. In the centre stood a wooden table, its surface scarred and dusty, and against one wall a row of portraits leaned, their frames warped by time. A heavy iron chest, its lock rusted but intact, sat in a corner. Poirot approached the portraits first, his torch illuminating faces that bore the sharp features of the Ravencliff lineage. "Ancestors," he murmured, watching over their secrets. One portrait, half covered by a tattered cloth, depicted a stern man with Lord Edgar's eyes. The nameplate read, Sir Reginald Blackwood, 1895. Poirot's brow furrowed. The letters found in the library had spoken of Blackwood's ruin at Edgar's hands. Could this chamber be a shrine to that betrayal? Turning to the chest, Poirot produced his lock-picking tool, a slender instrument he wielded with the precision of a surgeon. The lock resisted at first, but with a soft click, it gave way. Inside lay a collection of documents, their edges brittle with age. Poirot sifted through them carefully, his gloved hands handling each page as if it were a sacred text. The papers detailed a partnership between Edgar Ravencliffe and Reginald Blackwood, centred on a coal mine venture that had promised vast wealth. But a series of letters revealed Edgar's deceit. He had falsified contracts, diverting profits to himself while leaving Blackwood bankrupt. The final document was a legal notice of Blackwood's disappearance, dated 12 years prior, with a handwritten note in the margin. He swore he'd return. Mon Dieu, Poirot said softly, passing the documents to Grayson. This is no mere grudge. It is a wound that festers across years. But is Blackwood the shadow, or has another taken his mantle? Grayson frowned, scanning the papers. You think Blackwood's back? Sneaking through passages to kill Ravencliffe. Sounds far-fetched, Poirot. The man's likely dead. Likely, but not certain, Poirot replied. And if not Blackwood, then someone who knows of this betrayal. The dagger, the passage, the note, all point to a mind that plans with care. He tucked the documents into his coat, his expression thoughtful. We must return to the household, Inspector. The past is speaking, but the present will confess. As they retraced their steps, Poirot's torch caught a glint on the passage floor. A single pearl, small but luminous. He knelt, retrieving it with a handkerchief. Interesting, he murmured. A pearl lost in such a place. Whose adornment, I wonder? Back in the library, Poirot's attention turned to the jewelled dagger, now in Grayson's custody as evidence. He requested to examine it, noting its intricate hilt engraved with the Ravencliffe crest, a raven in flight. This was no weapon of convenience, Poirot said. It was taken from the hall display, accessible to all, yet chosen for its significance. A message, perhaps, or a distraction. Grayson scratched his chin. You're saying the killer wanted us to notice the dagger? Précisément, Poirot said. It is too bold, too traceable. It suggests either arrogance or a desire to implicate another. His eyes drifted to the desk, where the toppled inkwell had left a stain like a dark halo. He righted it, his fingers brushing a small, overlooked detail. A faint scratch on the desk's edge, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. Curious, he said, filing the observation away. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the garden. A maid's cry drew them to the window, where a small crowd had gathered. Poirot and Grayson hurried outside, the cold air biting at their faces. Clara Ravencliffe lay crumpled on the gravel path, her face pale, her breathing shallow. Beside her was a small glass vial, its contents spilled onto the ground. Dr. Thorne knelt beside her, his medical bag open, his hands moving with practiced urgency. What's happened? Grayson demanded, pushing through the servants. Thorne looked up, his face grim. She's been poisoned, I think. A sedative, likely chloral hydrate. I've given her something to stabilize her, but she needs rest. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he studied the vial. Poison, Monsieur le Docteur? Or an attempt to appear so? Tell me, how did you come to be here so quickly? Thorne flushed, his spectacles slipping down his nose. I was in the conservatory reviewing notes. I heard the maid scream and came at once. I always carry my bag. It's habit. Most convenient, Poirot said, his tone neutral but his gaze piercing. He knelt beside Clara, noting her slow recovery, her eyes fluttering open. Mademoiselle, can you speak? What happened? Clara's voice was weak, her words halting. Was walking. Felt dizzy. Someone offered me tea. I don't remember. She trailed off, her hand clutching at the air. Poirot stood, his mind racing. Tea, you say? From whom? Clara shook her head, unable to answer. Grayson ordered the servants to carry her to her room, under Thorne's supervision. Poirot, however, lingered by the vial, his handkerchief carefully lifting it to his nose. The faint, sweet odour confirmed Thorne's diagnosis, but something in the doctor's haste troubled him. "Inspector," he said quietly, "we must test this vial for fingerprints, and we must question the kitchen staff about this tea." Grayson nodded, his scepticism giving way to grudging respect. "You think this is connected to the murder? I think, mon ami, that nothing in this house is unconnected. The shadow spreads, and we must follow its edges." Back inside, Poirot requested a private word with Evelyn Marsh, whose pearl necklace had caught his eye during dinner. He found her in the drawing room, her composure as polished as ever, though her fingers toyed with the strand at her throat. "Mademoiselle Marsh," he began, producing the pearl from his pocket. "This was found in the secret passage. Is it yours?" Evelyn's eyes widened briefly, but she recovered with a laugh. "My goodness, Monsieur Poirot, you do find the most curious things. It could be mine. I've lost a pearl or two over the years, but I haven't been creeping through passages, I assure you." Poirot smiled, his eyes never leaving hers. "Of course, mademoiselle. Yet pearls do not wander alone. If you recall anything, you will tell Hercule Poirot, oui?" As she nodded, her smile tight, Poirot turned to Grayson. "We must search the rooms of all guests, Inspector. Discreetly, but thoroughly. The pearl, the passage, the poison. These are not accidents. They are the work of a mind that weaves a web, and we must find its centre." The castle's corridors seemed to close in as they moved to organize the search, the weight of its secrets pressing heavier with each step. Poirot's little grey cells hummed, piecing together the fragments. Blackwood's betrayal, the Ravencliff dagger, Clara's poisoning, and the cryptic note in Edgar's hand. The murderer was close, their presence as tangible as the mist outside, and Poirot knew that the next move in this deadly game was his to make. Chapter 5. The Raven's Curse. The atmosphere in Ravencliff Castle had grown as taut as a violin string, each occupant moving with the wary caution of those who sensed danger but could not name it. The morning mist had given way to a sullen drizzle, the rain tapping against the castle's ancient windows like impatient fingers. Hercule Poirot, standing in the grand drawing room, surveyed the gathered household with eyes that missed nothing. The discovery of the secret passage, the poisoning of Clara Ravencliff, and the cryptic note in Lord Edgar's hand had deepened the mystery, and Poirot knew that the murderer was watching, waiting for his next misstep. But Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells in full vigour, was not a man to falter. The drawing room, with its heavy damask curtains and ornate fireplace, was a fitting stage for what Poirot intended, a confrontation not with accusations, but with questions designed to unsettle. Lady Margaret sat by the window, her black morning gown absorbing the dim light, her face a mask of composure that betrayed no hint of grief. Charles paced near the hearth, his hands thrust into his pockets, his earlier bravado replaced by a restless agitation. Clara, pale but recovering, sat on a velvet settee, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes darting to the others. Dr. Alistair Thorne, his spectacles glinting, stood near a bookcase, his fingers nervously tracing the spine of a volume. Evelyn Marsh reclined in an armchair, her elegance undimmed, though the faint tightening of her jaw suggested she was not as at ease as she appeared. Poirot stepped forward, his small frame commanding the room's attention, with the quiet authority of a maestro. "Messieurs, mesdames," he began, his voice clear and precise. "The murder of Lord Edgar Ravencliff is no act of chance, nor is it the work of this so-called raven's curse. Non, it is a human hand, guided by a human mind, that struck him down, and that mind is among us now." He paused, letting his words settle, noting the flicker of unease in each face. This curse, this shadow of the raven, it is a fiction, a tale woven to distract. But Hercule Poirot sees through such distractions. I ask you now to speak plainly, for the truth will not remain hidden. Lady Margaret's eyes flashed with indignation. "Monsieur Poirot, you overstep. To suggest one of us would stoop to murder and to dismiss the curse as fiction. It's preposterous. Edgar believed in it, and now he's dead." Poirot inclined his head, his expression unyielding. "Belief, madame, does not make a thing true. Your husband wrote of a shadow, oui, but it was not a bird he feared. It was a person. Let us examine your movements once more. You were in your sitting room, you say, writing letters. Yet no letters were found, and your hands bear no trace of ink. How do you explain this?" Her lips parted, then closed, a flush creeping up her neck. "I may have been mistaken. I was reading, perhaps. The shock of Edgar's death has clouded my memory." "Most convenient," Poirot said softly, his gaze shifting to Charles. "And you, Monsieur Charles, you claim you were on the grounds, yet no one saw you. Your debts, they weigh heavily, non? A father who threatens to disinherit you. Such a man might tempt fate." Charles stopped pacing, his face darkening. "I told you. I was nowhere near the library. Yes, I owed money, but I'd never do that to father." "You've got no proof." "Proof," Poirot said, "is what I seek. And you, Mademoiselle Clara, you were sketching in the conservatory, alone. Yet you saw Charles outside, angry. Did you see anything else? A figure, perhaps, near the library?" Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on her handkerchief. "No, Monsieur Poirot. Just Charles, heading toward the stables. I was focused on my drawing." Poirot nodded, turning to Dr. Thorne. "And you, Monsieur le Docteur, you were reading journals in your room. Yet you were quick to reach Clara in the garden, with your medical bag at the ready. And this poison, this chloral hydrate, your knowledge of such substances is most fortuitous." Thorne's hands trembled, his voice rising. "I'm a physician, Poirot. It's my duty to act swiftly. I study poisons to understand them, not to use them. You're twisting my actions into something sinister." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. "And you, Mademoiselle Marche, you were rehearsing lines, alone, with a telephone that did not work. Yet a pearl from your necklace was found in the secret passage. A curious coincidence, non?" Evelyn's laughter was sharp, almost brittle. "My pearls scatter like my admirers, Monsieur Poirot. I told you I've lost a few over time. I've never set foot in that passage, and I'd have no reason to harm Edgar." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his voice softening to a dangerous whisper. "No reason, mademoiselle? Yet you and Lord Edgar shared a past, one that perhaps left scars. And scars, they can drive even the most charming to desperate acts." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing against the walls. Poirot stepped back, his hands clasped behind him. "You see, mes amis, the raven's curse is a distraction, but the truth is not. Someone here knows more than they say. I urge you to reflect, for the net of Hercule Poirot closes slowly, but it closes surely." As the group dispersed, their faces a mix of defiance and fear, Poirot turned to Inspector Grayson, who had been observing from the doorway. "They are rattled, Inspector, but not yet broken. We must push further. The dagger, I believe, holds another clue. Let us examine it again." In the library, Grayson produced the jewelled dagger, now sealed in an evidence bag. Poirot studied it through the plastic, noting the Ravencliff crest etched into the hilt. "This dagger," he said, "was kept in a display case in the hall, accessible to all. Yet it was chosen with purpose. To incriminate Charles, perhaps, whose debts make him vulnerable, or to evoke the family's history tied to this curse. Grayson frowned. It's a bold choice, I'll give you that. But anyone could have grabbed it. The case wasn't locked. Précisément, Poirot said. But the boldness is the point. The murderer wishes us to see the dagger, to think of family, of legacy. It is a performance, Inspector, and we must look behind the curtain. Their discussion was interrupted by a soft knock. Harris, the driver, entered, his face pale. Monsieur Poirot, sir, I found something in the stables. Thought you should see it. He held out a crumpled piece of cloth, stained with what appeared to be dried blood. Poirot took it, his eyes narrowing. Where precisely, Monsieur Harris? Behind a hay bale, sir. I was checking the horses, and it was tucked away, like someone hid it in a hurry. The cloth was coarse, likely a servant's rag, but the blood was unmistakable. Poirot handed it to Grayson. Have this analysed, Inspector. It may belong to our victim, or to another act we have yet to uncover. As Grayson left to arrange the analysis, Poirot returned to the drawing room, his mind alight with possibilities. The bloodied cloth, the pearl, the poisoned tea. Each was a piece of the mosaic, but the pattern remained elusive. He decided to set a trap, a subtle provocation to flush out the guilty. Addressing the household at luncheon, he announced, Tonight, mes amis, I will reveal what I have learned of Lord Edgar's death. The library holds one final secret, a document I have placed there. It will name the shadow that stalks this house. The announcement caused a stir. Lady Margaret's fork paused mid-air. Charles's glass trembled. Clara's eyes widened. Dr. Thorne coughed violently, and Evelyn's smile froze. Poirot watched them all, his expression serene. The document was a fiction, a blank sheet locked in the desk, but the bait was set. That night, as the castle slept, Poirot concealed himself in the library's shadows, a vantage point near the secret passages, entrance. The clock ticked toward midnight, its rhythm a counterpoint to the pounding of his heart. At last, a figure emerged from the passage, moving with stealth. It was Dr. Thorne, his spectacles catching the moonlight as he approached the desk. His hands fumbled with the lock, his breath quick and uneven. Before Poirot could act, a sharp crack split the air. A gunshot. Thorne staggered, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. He collapsed with a groan, the desk key slipping from his grasp. Poirot sprang forward, his torch illuminating the scene. The passage was empty, the shooter gone. Thorne, conscious but in pain, gasped, I only wanted the truth. Grayson, alerted by the shot, burst in with 2 constables. Good God, Poirot, what's happened? Poirot knelt beside Thorne, his voice calm but urgent. The truth, Monsieur le Docteur, is what we seek. Who shot you, and why were you here? Thorne's eyes fluttered, his voice weak. I thought, the document, I knew too much. As the constables carried Thorne to safety, Poirot stood, his mind racing. The trap had worked, but not as he intended. The shooter had struck from the passage, their identity still hidden. The Raven's shadow loomed larger, but Poirot's resolve was unshaken. The game grows dangerous, Inspector, he said, his eyes gleaming. But Hercule Poirot plays to win. Chapter 6. The Second Attack. The gunshot that echoed through Ravencliff Castle in the dead of night left a palpable tension in its wake, as if the very stones held their breath. Hercule Poirot stood in the library, his torch casting stark shadows across the room where Dr. Alistair Thorne lay wounded, clutching his shoulder. The air was thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder, mingling with the musty odour of ancient books. Inspector Grayson, his face flushed with urgency, directed his constables to secure the scene, while a servant was dispatched to fetch medical supplies. Poirot, his eyes sharp as ever, knelt beside Thorne, his voice calm but insistent. Monsieur le Docteur, you must speak. Who fired upon you? And why did you seek the document I placed here? Thorne's face was pale, his breathing shallow, but his eyes flickered with a mix of pain and fear. I thought it might explain things I suspected, he gasped. About Edgar, about the poison. I didn't see who shot me. It came from the passage. His voice faltered, and he slumped back, his strength ebbing. Poirot rose, his expression grave. Take him to his room, Inspector, but keep a guard. He knows more than he says, and we must ensure his safety and his silence. As the constables carried Thorne away, Poirot turned his attention to the secret passage, its entrance still ajar. The torchlight revealed no immediate clues, no footprints, no dropped objects, but the darkness seemed to mock him, hiding the shooter's identity. Grayson, wiping his brow, approached. This is getting out of hand, Poirot. First a stabbing, now a shooting. Are we dealing with one killer or a whole nest of them? Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile belying the intensity in his eyes. One mind, Inspector, but a cunning one. The shot was meant to silence Thorne, or perhaps to warn others. We must find the weapon, and its owner. He gestured to the passage. Search it thoroughly, but with care. The murderer is clever, but not infallible. The household, roused by the commotion, gathered in the hall, their faces a gallery of suspicion and dread. Lady Margaret stood rigid, her black gown making her appear a spectre of vengeance. Charles's hands trembled, his earlier defiance replaced by raw nerves. Clara, still frail from her poisoning, leaned against a wall, her eyes wide with shock. Evelyn Marsh, her composure fraying, clutched her shawl tightly, her gaze darting to the library door. Poirot noted each reaction, his mind cataloguing their tells like cards in a high-stakes game. Messieurs, mesdames, he addressed them, his voice cutting through the murmurs. A second act of violence has occurred. Dr. Thorne is wounded, but alive. The one who fired the shot is among us, or has fled through the castle's hidden ways. I urge you to remain calm, but vigilant. The truth draws near, and the guilty grow desperate. Lady Margaret's voice was icy. This is madness, Monsieur Poirot. First my husband, now this. Are we all to be targets? Poirot met her gaze, unflinching. Not all, madame. Only those who threaten the murderer's secret. Tell me, did you hear anything tonight, before the shot? She shook her head, her lips a thin line. I was asleep until the noise woke me. I have nothing to add. Charles stepped forward, his voice hoarse. It wasn't me, Poirot. I swear it. I was in my room, trying to sleep. You can't pin this on me. Yet, Poirot said softly, a revolver registered to you was found in the library, Monsieur Charles. A curious coincidence, no? Charles paled, his mouth working soundlessly. My revolver? That's impossible. I keep it locked in my desk. Someone must have taken it. Clara's voice, faint but steady, broke the silence. I saw Charles in the hall earlier, before dinner. He was near the display case where the dagger was kept. I didn't think much of it then. But, Charles rounded on her, his face flushed. You little sneak, trying to save your own skin by throwing me to the wolves. I was just passing through. Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. Enough. Accusations without proof are but noise. We must examine the revolver, Inspector. Grayson produced the weapon, carefully wrapped in cloth. Poirot sniffed it delicately, detecting a faint trace of perfume, a floral note, sharp and distinctive. He recalled Evelyn Marsh's scent from their earlier encounter, a detail that tightened the web of suspicion. Mademoiselle Marsh, he said, turning to her. This revolver carries a hint of your perfume. Can you explain this? Evelyn's eyes widened, but she laughed, the sound brittle. My perfume? Darling, half the women in London wear it. I told you, I handle props. Guns, knives, you name it. But I didn't fire that one. I was in my room, like I said. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Of course, mademoiselle. Yet the air carries secrets, as does this castle. We shall see. The search for the revolver's origin led Poirot and Grayson to Charles's room, where the desk drawer was indeed locked, but showed faint scratches around the keyhole, evidence of tampering. Someone took it, Charles insisted, trailing behind. I'm being framed, I tell you. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone neutral. Or perhaps you are not as innocent as you claim. We shall test the revolver for fingerprints. We? As Grayson organized the forensic examination, Poirot returned to the library, his mind turning to the note found in Lord Edgar's hand. The raven's shadow will fall at midnight. The handwriting, he now confirmed with a sample from Edgar's desk, was indeed the victim's own. This suggested Edgar knew his life was in danger, yet chose not to name his enemy. Why? Fear? Or a deeper game? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a discovery in Edgar's study, adjacent to the library. A hidden safe, concealed behind a portrait of a stern Ravencliff ancestor, yielded a single letter. It was addressed to Edgar, written in a woman's hand, and accused Lady Margaret of an affair with Sir Reginald Blackwood years ago. The letter, unsigned but dated a month prior, hinted at a confrontation. You cannot hide the truth forever, Edgar. She betrayed you, and you know it. Poirot's eyes gleamed. This, Inspector, is a spark to the tinder. If Edgar confronted his wife, it may have ignited her rage, or another's. He tucked the letter away, his mind racing. Had Lady Margaret known of the accusation? Had it driven her to murder? Or was the letter a plant to divert suspicion? He sought out Lady Margaret in her sitting room, where she sat embroidering, her needle moving with mechanical precision. Madame, Poirot began, producing the letter. This was found in your husband's safe. It speaks of a betrayal. What can you tell me of Sir Reginald Blackwood? Her needle paused, her face paling. Reginald? That was a lifetime ago. A business partner, nothing more. Edgar was jealous, always seeing shadows where there were none. This letter is nonsense. Yet it troubled your husband enough to lock it away, Poirot pressed. Did he speak of it recently? She shook her head, her voice tight. No. He was distant, obsessed with his curse. If he believed this, he never said. Her eyes met Poirot's, defiant but guarded. I loved my husband, monsieur, whatever you think. Poirot bowed, his expression unreadable. Merci, madame. The heart. It is a complex thing, non? As he left, he encountered Clara in the corridor, her face still pale, but her resolve firm. Monsieur Poirot, I remembered something. The tea I drank. It was brought by a maid, but she said it was from Aunt Margaret. I thought it was kind, but now... Poirot's eyes narrowed. Most interesting, mademoiselle. We shall speak with this maid. The maid, a nervous girl named Lily, confirmed she had delivered tea to Clara at Lady Margaret's request. She said it was to calm Miss Clara's nerves, sir, Lily stammered. I didn't think nothing of it. Poirot dismissed her, his mind churning. The tea, the poison, the revolver, the letter, each pointed to a web of deceit, with Lady Margaret at its edge. But was she the spider, or merely a thread? He resolved to tighten his trap, to force the murderer's hand. That evening, he gathered the household in the dining room, his demeanour serene, but his words calculated. The attack on Dr. Thorne is a sign of desperation, he declared. The murderer fears exposure. I have found evidence, a letter, a weapon, a pearl, that points to the truth. Tomorrow, I shall name the guilty. The room buzzed with tension. Charles's hands clenched, Clara's breath caught, Evelyn's smile faltered, and Lady Margaret's eyes burned with an unspoken challenge. Poirot watched them all, knowing the murderer was among them, their next move imminent. As the castle settled into an uneasy silence, Poirot stood by his window, gazing at the rain-swept moors. The raven's shadow is but a man's hand, he murmured, and Hercule Poirot shall seize it. Chapter 7. The Final Revelation. The great hall of Ravencliff Castle stood bathed in the pallid light of a late afternoon, the rain having relented to reveal a sky bruised with clouds. The vast room, with its soaring ceiling and tapestries depicting the Ravencliff lineage, seemed to hold its breath as Hercule Poirot assembled the household for what he had promised would be the denouement of their grim drama. The air was heavy with anticipation. Each occupant of the castle, suspect, witness, or innocent, gathered around the long oak table, their faces a mosaic of apprehension and defiance. Poirot, his small frame immaculate in a tailored suit, stood at the head of the table, his eyes gleaming with the quiet confidence of a man who had unravelled the impossible. Lady Margaret Ravencliff sat with regal poise, her hands folded, her black morning gown a stark contrast to her pale skin. Charles Ravencliff slouched, his fingers drumming an uneven rhythm, his eyes darting to the others as if expecting betrayal. Clara Ravencliff, still frail from her poisoning but resolute, clutched a shawl around her shoulders, her gaze steady but wary. Dr. Alistair Thorne, his shoulder bandaged from the previous night's gunshot, leaned heavily on a cane, his spectacles reflecting the flickering light of the chandelier. Evelyn Marsh, her elegance tempered by a tightness in her jaw, sat with a studied nonchalance, her fingers toying with a single pearl earring. Inspector Grayson stood by the door, his notebook at the ready, his expression a mix of scepticism and grudging admiration for Poirot's theatrics. "Messieurs, mesdames," Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the oppressive silence. "We stand in the shadow of a crime most heinous, the murder of Lord Edgar Ravencliff, followed by the attempt on Mademoiselle Clara and the attack on Monsieur le Docteur Thorne. These acts are not the work of a curse, nor of a phantom raven, but of a mind both cunning and desperate. Tonight, Hercule Poirot will reveal that mind, for the truth, it cannot hide from the little grey cells." He paused, letting his words settle, noting the subtle shifts in posture. Lady Margaret's stiffened spine, Charles's clenched fist, Clara's sharp intake of breath, Thorne's nervous adjustment of his spectacles, Evelyn's forced smile. "Let us reconstruct," he continued, his hands clasped behind him, his tone measured, but relentless. "Lord Edgar was stabbed in his library, the door bolted, the windows latched. A locked room, but not impenetrable. The secret passage, discovered behind the bookcase, provided the means, a hidden way to enter and exit, unseen. This was no impulse, but a plan, meticulous and bold." He turned to the table, where the jeweled dagger lay in its evidence bag, its emerald-encrusted hilt glinting accusingly. The dagger, taken from the hall's display case, was a choice deliberate. It is a Ravencliff heirloom, tied to the family's legacy. Why use such a weapon? To point to a family member, perhaps, or to evoke the myth of the raven's curse. And the note in Lord Edgar's hand, "The raven's shadow will fall at midnight," written in his own script, suggests he knew his danger, yet did not name his foe. Why? Because he trusted, or because he feared? Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. "Let us consider the motives. Monsieur Charles, your debts were a burden, and your father's threat to disinherit you a wound. Mademoiselle Clara, you stood to gain from a new will, a fact that sparked envy. Monsieur le Docteur Thorne, your knowledge of poisons and your swift presence at Clara's side raise questions. Mademoiselle Marsh, your past with Lord Edgar and a pearl found in the passage suggests secrets. And you, Madame Margaret, a letter accusing you of betrayal with Sir Reginald Blackwood hints at a marriage strained by suspicion." Lady Margaret's eyes flashed. "This is outrageous, Monsieur Poirot. You dare accuse me based on a letter I never saw." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture calming but firm. "Patience, madame. Accusation comes only with proof. Let us proceed. The poisoning of Mademoiselle Clara with chloral hydrate was no accident. The tea, delivered at your request, madame, suggests intent. And the shooting of Monsieur Thorn, with a revolver bearing Monsieur Charles' name, but Mademoiselle Marche's perfume, points to a web of deceit. He stepped forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But the truth, it is like a mosaic, each piece fitting only one way. The murderer is Lady Margaret Ravenscliffe, aided by Dr. Alistair Thorne. A gasp rippled through the room. Lady Margaret rose, her face white with fury. This is slander. I loved my husband. Poirot's eyes were unrelenting. Love, madame, or control? You resented Lord Edgar's dominance, his decision to favour Clara in his will. You knew of the secret passage, having explored the castle's secrets in your youth. On the night of the murder, you slipped through the passage, stabbed him with the family dagger to cast suspicion on Charles, and returned to the dining room, your absence unnoticed in the chaos of the scream. The note, written by Edgar, was your inspiration, a way to cloak your act in superstition. He turned to Thorne. And you, Monsieur le Docteur, you supplied the chloral hydrate to silence Clara, who suspected your complicity. You knew of Lady Margaret's plan, perhaps out of loyalty, perhaps for gain. When I placed a decoy document in the library, you sought it, fearing it exposed you. But another acted first, the shooter, whose identity we shall address. Thorne's face crumpled, his voice hoarse. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Margaret asked for the sedative, said it was for Clara's nerves. I didn't know she'd use it to... He trailed off, his head bowed. Poirot's gaze shifted to Evelyn. And you, Mademoiselle Marche, you played a part, though not the killer's. The revolver, scented with your perfume, was your attempt to protect Charles, whom you love. You took it from his room, hoping to divert suspicion, but your act only deepened the mystery. Evelyn's composure broke, tears welling in her eyes. I only wanted to help him, she whispered. Charles didn't do it. I knew that. Charles started, his voice cracking. Evelyn, you did that for me? Poirot nodded, his expression softening. Love, it can cloud judgment, but it does not kill. The true killer is Lady Margaret, whose rage at her husband's control and fear of losing her status drove her to murder. The letter about Blackwood was her motive, a wound reopened by Edgar's accusations. Lady Margaret's voice was a hiss. He was a tyrant. He humiliated me, threatened to expose me for a lie. I had no choice. Grayson stepped forward, his handcuffs ready. That's enough, Lady Margaret. You're under arrest. Dr. Thorne, you'll come too. As the constables led them away, Poirot turned to Clara, who sat stunned. Mademoiselle, your uncle's faith in you was not misplaced. The shadow lifts, and you are free. The hall emptied, leaving Poirot alone with Grayson. A tidy wrap-up, Poirot, Grayson said, grudgingly impressed. But who shot Thorne? Poirot's eyes twinkled. A question for another day, perhaps. Or perhaps a servant, loyal to Lady Margaret, fearing Thorne's confession. We shall investigate, non? As the castle's shadows retreated, Poirot felt the weight of the truth settle. The raven's curse was no more, but the human heart, with its passions and betrayals, remained the true enigma. Chapter 8. The raven's shadow lifts. The storm that had battered Ravencliff Castle for days had finally broken, and a fragile sunlight filtered through the high windows of the great hall, casting long, tentative rays across the polished stone floor. The castle, so recently a crucible of suspicion and fear, seemed to exhale, its ancient walls settling into a quieter melancholy. Hercule Poirot stood by one of the tall windows, his small, immaculate figure framed against the moorland beyond. His hands were clasped behind his back, his moustache perfectly symmetrical, his eyes reflecting a serene satisfaction. The murderer of Lord Edgar Ravenscliffe had been unmasked, and the web of deceit that entangled the household had been unravelled. Yet Poirot's mind lingered on the final threads of the mystery, particularly the unresolved question of Dr. Thorne's shooter. Inspector Grayson, his broad frame filling the doorway, approached with a weary but respectful nod. "You've done it again, Poirot," he said, his voice gruff but tinged with admiration. "Lady Margaret and Thorne are in custody, and the evidence is solid. Your passage, the dagger, the poison. But I'll be damned if I'm not still wondering about that gunshot. You said it might be a servant. Got any more to add?" Poirot turned, his expression enigmatic. "Mon ami, the gunshot was a desperate act, a final attempt to protect the guilty. I suspect a loyal retainer, perhaps the maid Lily, acting on Lady Margaret's whispered orders to silence Thorne before he could betray her. But without the revolver's fingerprints or a confession, it remains a shadow within a shadow. We shall leave it to your diligent constables to pursue." "We?" Grayson grunted, scribbling a note. "Fair enough. I'll have my men question the staff again. But you're sure it's not one of the others? Charles, Clara, or that actress?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Quite sure, Inspector. Charles's fear was genuine, Clara's innocence proven by her own near death, and Mademoiselle Marsh's actions, while misguided, were born of affection, not malice. The heart of this crime lies with Lady Margaret's cold ambition and Thorne's complicity." The household, now diminished by the arrests, gathered in the drawing room for a final reckoning. Charles Ravenscliffe, his usual swagger subdued, stood near the fireplace, his hands in his pockets. Clara, her strength slowly returning, sat on a cushioned chair, her auburn hair catching the light. Evelyn Marsh, her elegance softened by a newfound vulnerability, leaned against a window, her gaze distant. The servants hovered at the edges, their faces a mix of relief and unease, aware that their own roles might yet be scrutinized. Poirot addressed them, his voice gentle but clear. "Mes amis, the shadow that darkened Ravenscliffe Castle has lifted. Lord Edgar's death was no curse, but a human tragedy, driven by greed and wounded pride. Lady Margaret, fearing the loss of her status and enraged by accusations of betrayal, struck him down. Dr. Thorne, swayed by loyalty or fear, aided her with poison meant for Mademoiselle Clara. Mademoiselle Marsh, your attempt to shield Monsieur Charles was foolish, but your heart was true." Charles stepped forward, his voice rough. "Monsieur Poirot, I don't know how to thank you. I was a fool, gambling away father's trust, but I swear I'll do better. For his memory." Poirot inclined his head. "Monsieur, the past is a lesson, not a chain. Use it wisely." Clara rose, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Uncle Edgar believed in me, and I'll honour that. The estate, what's left of it, will be a legacy of good, not greed. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot's smile was warm. "Mademoiselle, your spirit is the true Ravenscliffe heirloom. Guard it well." Evelyn approached, her usual poise tempered by sincerity. "I was wrong to meddle, monsieur. I thought I was saving Charles, but I only made things worse. I'll leave the scheming to the stage from now on." Poirot chuckled softly. "Mademoiselle, the stage is where your talents shine. Leave the shadows to Hercule Poirot." As the group dispersed, their steps lighter, but still heavy with the weight of recent events, Poirot lingered with Harris, the driver, who had remained a quiet presence throughout. "Monsieur Harris," Poirot said, his tone thoughtful, "you heard the scraping of stone. You found the bloodied cloth. Your observations were most valuable. Tell me, have you seen anything else? A servant, perhaps, acting strangely?" Harris hesitated, his weathered face creasing. "Can't say for sure, sir. But Lily, the maid, she's been jumpy since last night, avoiding the others. Might be nothing, but..." Poirot nodded, filing the detail away. "Merci, monsieur. You have the eyes of a hawk, even if you do not know it." As Harris retreated, Poirot returned to the window, gazing at the moors stretching endlessly into the distance. The raven's shadow, he mused, was no supernatural force, but the darkness of human ambition, fear, and betrayal. Lady Margaret's cold calculation, Thorne's weak complicity, Evelyn's reckless loyalty, each had played a part in the tragedy, but it was Poirot's methodical mind that had brought order to chaos. He turned to Grayson, who was preparing to depart. "Inspector, you will find the shooter, I have no doubt, but the heart of this case is resolved. The castle may heal now, if those within it choose truth over secrets." Grayson tipped his hat. "You're a queer one, Poirot, but I'll be damned if you're not the sharpest mind I've met. Safe travels back to London." Poirot bowed slightly. "Merci, mon ami. The train awaits, and Hercule Poirot has other puzzles to solve." As he boarded the car to Ravencliff Station, the castle receding behind him, Poirot felt a quiet satisfaction. The human heart, with its labyrinthine passions, was a mystery as old as time, but with order and method, even its darkest corners could be illuminated. The wind whispered across the moors, carrying away the last echoes of the raven's shadow, and Poirot, with a final adjustment of his hat, turned his thoughts to the next challenge awaiting his little grey cells.